Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for listening to the Two Doomed Men podcast. It is Scagz here. No captain today. He's a little bit busy. I am joined instead by the host of the Pilsners Politics Podcast, Benji. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, Scagz. How are you, man?
Good, man. Thank you again for coming on with me. So it's just me and you. We're the Two Doomed Men today.
Awesome.
Ben is a member of the Patriot Podcast Network. We were just talking about that before. So Ben, I think I had you on a long time ago, dude, when we did the launch party, and we had like 20 people in here at once. It was pretty crazy. It was fun. So we didn't really get to spend any one-on-one time. But that was the last time you were on. So thanks for coming back again and doing a one-on-one with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I got to give you a shout out here. I absolutely love what you guys are doing. It's great to have podcasters like us out there, just spewing truth, right? And giving the listeners and the followers a whole new perspective, as opposed to just consuming what the mainstream media has to offer.
Yeah, of course, man. And I do appreciate like the little community that we've also built, the Patriot Podcast Network. I was saying before, like I've had guys here in person. We don't always agree on everything either, and I think that's good. Sometimes like Garrett from Sergeant Samurai grinds my gears about a certain topic, and me and him will go back and forth. That's a good thing. We're not an echo chamber. I really appreciate what you guys do on the show and kind of like the whole layout and theme. I like how you use like that same font theme with the yellow and the black, and you post like like your takes online. Like I just like the whole presentation and everything. I really respect also that you are very principled in a lot of your takes. Like you don't really seem to deviate much based on whatever, like the outrages of the day or something like that. You always seem to have a very principled take on things. So I've always appreciated that.
Yeah, it's important. I think where this conversation is going to go, I think we can kind of delve into why it's important to stay principled, and why it's also important to welcome an array of ideas and an array of opinions.
Yeah, definitely. So we are going to talk about Trump and DeSantis, the primary battle. But real quick, man, first, why don't you tell everybody where can they find your show? And then why don't you tell us actually a little bit about your show in general?
Yeah, sure. So Pilsners Politics Podcast can be found on about 38 different platforms. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can listen to Pilsners and Politics. Our three top applications would be Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. And obviously, I'm on the Patriot Podcast Network. You can find that on Roku. Unfortunately, I'm not on YouTube. My videos have been suspended. My account's been suspended.
They got you too, huh?
They did.
Shit, man. This is something we were telling Alan and James. I was like, I think we're the only show like from the Patriot Podcast Network left on YouTube. So I'm trying to be a little careful where we can to just remain as the one voice from the network on YouTube. But at the same time, they got the axes out for us after we had Alan and James here in person. So,
but the good thing is, even though you can't find me on YouTube, you can find some of my stuff on Rumble when I find the time to upload that content. But about Pilsners and Politics, I think March of 2020 opened up the eyes of a lot of people. And for those of you who may not know what I'm talking about, it would be the COVID lockdowns. And that's when I decided to start my podcast. Prior to the U.S. Going into such hard communist lockdowns. So I saw what was going on in China, and I remember saying to myself in January, there's absolutely no way that this is ever going to happen in America. And I said that because I truly believed a majority of Americans cherished their freedom and their liberty as much as I did. And come the second week of March, our government, the state, asked us to enter into a social contract with them. And we did in good faith. And we said, okay, government, you're telling us that we need to stay home for 2 weeks in order to stop the spread. Well, unfortunately, that lasted over 3 years. And here we are with less liberty and less freedom. Something I say quite often is this: it's that power usurped is rarely relinquished. And I think what we saw, and both Democrats and Republicans are to blame, was an attack and a usurpation on our liberty that they'll never give back to us until we make them.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's funny too that I ask almost every podcaster guest who comes on the show, like, when did you start the show? And the answer is always 2020, right? Like,
Yeah,
and I always say on every time, I'm like, if you can see a graph or a chart of like how many podcasts are in existence at 2020, it must go through the roof
yeah,
with people who were
absolutely.
just like they had a call to action and they were just motivated by what was going on to go out there and speak their mind and fight back in some way or another. And podcasts just happen to be one of the ways people do it.
Right. You say call to action, and I got shivers, and that's exactly what it was. It was a call to action for me. For so long, Scagz, I sat on the sidelines, and I'm very opinionated, right? I make sure my opinion is known. Um, but I sat on the sidelines and I watched, and I kind of, I'm like, I'm not really going to get involved too much. I'll do my civic duty. I'll vote when I have to. I'm very active in the GOP here in my county. I've always been very active no matter where I've been living, but never actually like took that action to go do something. And 2020, I was just like, this is it. I have to do it, and I don't care if I only reach one person. My goal is to help them find their courage and to speak out against a tyrannical government.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's worth pointing out that while at the time, a lot of us did gave the benefit of the doubt the first 2 weeks. As I like to say, like, hey, I watched The Walking Dead. I'm aware of like pandemics and things like that. And I try to be like a survivalist to some extent. I don't know what the fuck was going on
Right.
exactly. But after that, I understood like, oh, this is bullshit. And this is gonna go on forever. And while a lot of people did kind of succumb to like Americans just throwing away their freedom and their liberty. A lot of people didn't as well. A lot of people
Right.
went the other way and became extraordinarily combative and red pilled, including myself. Like my political opinions have leaps and bounds changed over the past 3 years because of directly tied to COVID, where I went from
Right.
being like a Bernie bro to now like a right wing anarchist, libertarian sort of person. So it's a white pill to me to see how many people did have that call to action and how many people did, not just capitulate to whatever was the Andrew Cuomo's edict was on television at any moment.
Right. Right. And it's also inspiring, right, to know
Yes.
that there are people out there who continue to cherish their liberty and who are willing to sacrifice so much to ensure it stays enshrined in our nation.
Yeah. What is it? Thomas Jefferson, right? He has that quote. I'm blanking on it. It's like freedom requires perpetual vigilance or
Right.
something like that. And
Right.
I thought this was a great example of him being correct. The founding fathers, they always had these little tidbits of wisdom you could point back to, or they just one-liner quotes that are so goddamn applicable to the
Right.
current times we live in. And I thought that was a really, really good one.
And you wonder why public schools and state-run schools and or education camps, why they want to erase our founding fathers, because I say in my podcast all the time, I say that our founding fathers were leaps and bounds beyond their time. Like they knew history so well
Yep.
that they knew it rhymed. They know history rhymes, and they knew that we would eventually be faced with the same usurpation as they were faced when they fought our Revolutionary War.
Yeah, without a doubt, they were men well ahead of their time. I'd say, and it's unfortunate the thing that they created has progressed to the level it's at now. But there's good people
Right.
like me and you, pushing back on the
That's it.
system. So I appreciate that. So, man, I the way I look at this whole primary battle, it's a little bit different for me than it is definitely for you, because I'm somewhat of an outsider. I'm not necessarily a Trump supporter or a DeSantis supporter. I'm a libertarian. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party, the Mises Caucus, all that stuff. I'm not an idiot. Like I live in reality at the same time, and I like to comment on politics. And I don't like what I've seen so far. Me and you had like a little bit of a Twitter exchange the other day. I felt like we definitely were on the same page. What do you consider yourself, though? I'd say, like, would you consider yourself a Trump supporter per se, or not a supporter of either guy, just a Republican?
So I am. I'm a Trump supporter, and I make that known in my podcast. In fact, I wore the T-shirt for. Let me stand up here
Miss
for
me yet?
for the viewers, right?
Yeah.
But so I am. I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm also a proponent of having multiple candidates within the primary process. And it's important for several different reasons, and I think that we're eventually going to get into the reasons why it's so important.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, me too. I think competition is a good thing, regardless. Like, I'm a free market capitalist. Competition is the best. It doesn't matter if it's big screen TVs, Teslas or politics. Like the way I viewed, at least somewhat naively, I guess you could say, going into this primary battle between these two guys, is that this would be good for both of them, right? Because Trump has definitely some blind spots where he's not perfect, and DeSantis as well. He has some blind spots. I'm like, okay, if they go head to head, perhaps they will hold each other accountable on those blind spots, and that will make whoever comes out on top at the end better.
Right.
To my dismay at this point, I mean, it is still early. That is not what's happened. I think you put it well when me and you were talking on Twitter. You're like, it's been real juvenile between the camps, at least. And from Trump himself, I'd say his behavior's kind of been pretty juvenile, but that's in a sense Trump. Right. On the other hand, DeSantis, he has, interestingly enough, not really taken the bait of any of that stuff. And he's almost not even said Trump's name most of the time. And I don't know, my opinion is I think if he is going to actually beat Trump, he does need to take him head on instead of this kind of like wishy-washy, tiptoe around it, not say the guy's name at all. I don't think he's had the energy yet. Again, it is still early. I don't know, man. What do you think?
So there's the reason he's not saying his name, in my opinion, is because he doesn't want to give him any more ID. But if and I'm sure his political advisors are DeSantis, that is, they're telling him, hey, don't mention by name, don't say his name, because you're just going to give him more traction. But then I come from the standpoint where it's like, this guy doesn't need any more name recognition. He is President Trump. He
probably
is
the most famous person in the world right now. I mean, like, who doesn't know about him at this point?
Right. So I think that as we see the primary field start to weed out and get thinner, I think you'll start to see DeSantis actually acknowledging Trump and take him head on. But I'm also with you. I think he entered the primary a little late. And he needs to gain a lot of ground. Some of the last polls I saw, Trump was up by 45 points, and that's a huge deficit to make up in a few short months.
Yeah, I mean, was he? Am I right? I think he was waiting DeSantis to announce his run because of some law in Florida that kind of prevented him. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding was that there was a law that the Florida state legislature had passed that basically says that if you run for another office, you have to vacate the office that you're currently in. Now, I imagine they probably changed that law very recently.
Yeah, like I missed that. If they did, I missed it.
Yeah, same. So I'm not too sure why he hasn't stepped down from the governorship, but I imagine the law must have been changed.
It must be, and if I'll give it must have been, I would think, right? Or they did something to make it. Otherwise, someone there would be using it politically against him, I would assume. Right. If there's one thing I will give DeSantis kudos to is that he does seem very technical with like rules and laws and kind of like using the system. Like he's not afraid to use the system to combat his political enemies or get his way. As a libertarian, I'm like allergic to that to some extent. But then at the same time, I recognize the other side does not give a fuck about principle or anything like that. And we're in this weird cold civil war, I guess you could call it, right? So I have appreciated at times, like DeSantis is just, you know what, fuck it, I don't care. I'm just going to use whatever means necessary I have to combat the insane woke stuff or whatever it might be on some level. I have a video here that I shared with you earlier about why he didn't wait to just, to run for president. I know a lot of people have said, well, and I know like from the MAGA crowd, the reason why they're so upset is I guess they feel backstabbed or betrayed by DeSantis because he was like a MAGA guy to some extent. And that's what I said. I don't like the rhetoric around it because it's gotten juvenile. It's gotten like they're talking about each other's wives and like diet pills and stuff like that instead of any actual policy things. I remember when I was talking about Alan, when Alan was here, I was like, hey man, I was like, Alan, you're friends with Roger Stone. Could you please tell Roger Stone to tell Trump to challenge DeSantis on his Ukraine position instead of like his wife or
Right.
something like that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Let's talk policy.
Yeah. So what exactly do you think can be gained policy wise from at this point, like seeing what's occurred so far in terms of the rhetoric on both sides? Like, do you think that something can actually be gained from the competition?
You mean how things are currently being run?
Yeah, in a sense, right? Like right now, I don't see much being, I don't see anything positive coming from what's happening right now. Like, do you think it's going to turn around and it will be some sort of actual like battle of ideas and strategies, and we'll get
I
to, really compare the two guys against each other in a meaningful way instead of like the lowest common denominator way, which is happening right now?
Yeah, I do. I think eventually we will get the policy. And as a Trump supporter, I think Trump should be focused on his policy and less on the insults. But also, I will say he quite frequently does put out policy decisions. For example, he just recently put out a policy decision regarding migrants and the birthright, right? But I think a lot of what he's putting out is getting drowned out by what we refer to as the juvenile nature
Sure.
of the discussion between the two camps. And that's one thing I'll say about Twitter is super vile. It's
Yeah.
always been vile. It was vile under the last owner, right, Jack, and it's currently still vile under Elon Musk. It's a weird place. And honestly, I had never been big into Twitter, and I was like, I'm just gonna give this thing a shot. And when I think I had signed up for Twitter before Elon had even bought the company, and I was like, all right, well, Elon's buying it. I think things will get a little bit better, but it's super weird. It's
It
vile.
is. It's a war zone at all times
It
of the day for the most part.
right.
Chris and I have referred to it as just a double-edged sword, where like it could just be so negative. You have to make sure you go into there with the mindset of understanding what's exactly going on and not taking it into the outside world yourself. But then there's good things as well, because you could learn so much on Twitter from people directly. You could use it to your advantage to expose things that are happening, whereas before we didn't have that tool in a sense. Like you had to rely on the corporate press, the New York Times, to post an expose about somebody, and obviously they've been fucking exposed, and the corporate press has been exposed the past couple of years. So how
Right.
fake they are, and how controlled they are by the state, or the deep state, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it really is a crazy place, man. But one of the things I appreciate you again is like your principled take on these things, and I've noticed you don't seem to get into the weeds too much, as I might on occasion with people. I was getting into a couple people today, so I appreciate that. Yeah, any other
Before you
thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
before you play the video, I want to talk directly to both the DeSantis camp and
Yeah.
the Trump camp here. As you and I discuss why it's important to have multiple people within the primary process, I want us to think about two things. One, we're the party, Republicans here, GOP, even libertarians, we're the party that believes that free speech is integral to a thriving society. And that goes for intra-party arguments and fights. So to the DeSantis camp and to the Trump camp, it's good to have healthy debate, and it's good to disagree with one another, but don't stifle each other's conversations. In fact, listen to the other side and maybe try to learn something from that side. And that's what sets us apart from the left. And most Democrats. And I want to make sure that your listeners are well aware that the left, to me, are not the Democrats, right? For far too long, I miss um, I misuse the word the left, right? I would always lump the two
I get it. Yep.
together. The left is not Democrats. The left hides within the Democrat Party. The left are the communists and the Marxists who hide in the shadows, who are now out in the open, who want to destroy our country, and they're trying to usher in a revolution. That's what the left does. The left stifles conversation. Guys, we don't stifle conversation. Well, let's be respectful and listen to one another.
Yeah, definitely. Reason why too, I do like, I mean, the Libertarian Party has its problems, of course, but I like the idea that the new leadership has put forward, where obviously libertarians are the biggest freedom of speech proponents that exist, but also at the same time, like, what's our role? What is this party's role to hold Republicans accountable where it can. So I'm sure you're well familiar with like, oh, well, a vote for a libertarian is really a vote for a Democrat.
Well aware.
Yeah, motherfucker, you're right. So you better be a really good Republican, and then we won't challenge you and ruin your chances in your election. And like a Thomas Massey or a Rand Paul, there's no reason to run a libertarian candidate against those guys, or like a Matt Gaetz or whoever, because they're pretty good, right? Just leave them alone. But if you're I don't know, Mitch McConnell just was most obvious example. Like, yeah, we're gonna try and ruin your shit and hold you accountable. And also, I just think to have that libertarian, perspective and dialogue, try and get into the Republican space is valuable. Like Ron Paul, for example. My God, I mean, I wish Republicans would have listened to Ron Paul sooner. They seem to be listening to a lot of things he says now. It's like 20 years too late, unfortunately. Right. But everyone has something to contribute to the space. And I wish everybody would actually just listen to each other and take each other seriously the way some of us do, like in the podcasting space and whatnot. We don't have to agree on everything, and we can get annoyed at each other and whatnot. That's fine. But at the end of the day, like, I learn a lot from you. I learn a lot from Dave Smith, and I learn a lot from Alan and whoever. It's you piece together what's best from everybody, and you form your opinions. That's what freedom of speech is supposed to be about. Chris and I were talking about it last night, just the idea of freedom of speech, and it doesn't exist to say things that everyone agrees with only. The only like area where freedom of speech has any value is in disagreement or saying things that are controversial. Otherwise, like, what freedom of speech do you have if everybody is saying the exact same thing and towing the exact same line? Where we made the reference of like talking about Star Wars. Like, great, I could talk about Star Wars, right? Is that really like a use of freedom of speech? No, not really. No one, I mean, people might challenge me on nerd stuff, but the government is not going to be really interested in that for the most part. It's valueless in terms of freedom of speech. So I appreciate that, definitely. What's up, Doom Nation? It is Scagz here. And I appreciate there being, like a robust conversation, as they say. So real quick, let's get back to DeSantis here. Like we were saying, I know a lot of people have been like, hey, like, why didn't this guy just wait 4 more years? And then, 2028 comes around, takes his turn, and we go from there. So he actually kind of was asked this question on Fox News the other day, and we're going to listen to his response. It's about a minute long, then we can get our comments after.
Why is right now the time for Ron DeSantis to run for president?
Because everyone knows if I'm the nominee, I will beat Biden and I will serve 2 terms, and I will be able to destroy leftism in this country and leave woke ideology on the dustbin of history. At the end of the day, I've shown in Florida an ability to win huge swaths of voters that Republicans typically can't win, while also delivering the boldest agenda anywhere in the country. And I think there's a reason why the legacy media is attacking me more than they're attacking anybody else, because I think they realize that if I'm successful in winning the Republican nomination, we're going to bring it home in the general election. And I've pledged to Republican voters, if you nominate me, I will be taking the oath of office on January 20th, 2025 on the west side of the Capitol. No excuses, no more excuses about why we can't get it done. We need to get it done, and I will get it done.
So interesting, right? I mean, again, he doesn't mention Trump by name, but again, for me, the way I'm viewing this at it is he's kind of saying like, well, I can actually win, where Trump can't actually win against Biden. What is your take, man? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I just think that he's waiting until the field gets a little thinner. And if Trump is still around, which I think everybody knows Trump is still going to be around, he'll start to call him out by name. I think he should be calling him out by name now, because by not mentioning his name, I think he's signaling to his supporters that he doesn't even think Trump's competition. Like there's no way this guy's going to win.
Doesn't
So
jive with
why
reality,
even
though.
mention him?
Yeah.
I know it doesn't.
When you look at the poll numbers, Trump is up big. I know obviously Trump has a hugely loyal base. Like it's just politically speaking, political strategy speaking, it doesn't make sense to me.
No, me neither. He should face him head on, because there's really only two camps. There's really only one camp that DeSantis has to pull votes from, and that's the MAGA crowd. That's the Trump crowd. You're not going to have a huge Tim Scott crowd. You're not going to have a huge Pence crowd. Nikki Haley. There's not going to be a lot of supporters. What's important to note, especially for the listeners, and I know your listeners are well attuned to what's going on, and they're extremely intelligent. But a lot of these people who throw their hat in the ring, they're doing so because they're looking for jobs in the next administration, right? They're trying to prove their worth, and they're trying to show, the gird that they have, and how they can handle themselves on a national stage. So the Nikki Haley, I truly don't believe she thinks she has a chance. Pence probably thinks he has a chance in a DeSantis White House. He definitely does not have a chance in a Trump White House, right?
Right. I see Vivek that way, Ramaswamy, right? Like, yes. I think his stock, although his poll numbers are low, at least in my opinion, someone who's like watching what's going on, checking, like, this guy's pretty smart. I definitely don't agree with him on everything. I think today he said something, just my opinion, is a little bit crazy as a libertarian. He's going to use the military to like attack Mexico and attack the cartels there, in a sense. So like, I will disagree with that tactic, but otherwise, I feel like that's exactly what Vivek is doing, kind of like putting on display how well-spoken he is and how much he understands things. And I feel like Vivek, real side note, has actually added to the conversation within the primary to some extent. Like he's a really smart dude. He's bringing a lot to the table and laying it out there and doing it in the right way. Like he hasn't attacked Trump either, really at all. He's been complimentary of Trump, but he's managed to kind of add something to the conversation at the same time.
Yeah, and I think again he's probably vying for some form of cabinet position when President Trump becomes 47.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think with DeSantis also there, he says he'll be able to beat Biden. He'll be able to be a two-term president and destroy leftism. There seems to be a lot like the core theme of his campaign is like, I'm the anti-woke guy.
Right.
One of the things and I think you'll agree with me here is missing from everyone. I know maybe Trump has paid a little lip service to it, I think, at campaigns, but the discussion around like ballot harvesting and the mail-in votes, I don't see anybody talking about it. When the midterms are going on, everyone was complaining about it and saying, hey, like, we're never going to be able to fucking win if we don't fix this problem. It seems everyone's gotten amnesia to some extent. I maybe you correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really see how Trump or DeSantis is like taking on that issue. One of the only people I see doing anything in any regard whatsoever is Scott Presler. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's not affiliated with anyone. He's just a normal dude who's like a Republican activist, and he's a really nice guy trying to like have that ground game.
Right.
He's like the only person I see doing that on the conservative side of things. What do you think about that, man? I think that's a huge aspect that's missing so far.
So do I. And I will, I've been saying it since the last election. It's our state legislatures. The Constitution gives our state legislatures the time, place, and manner in which elections are to be held. Right. Unfortunately, we were hijacked by COVID dysphoria. We were hijacked by COVID power usurpation, where judges were legislating from the benches, right? We talk about ballot harvesting and how mass mail-in ballots were sent out to hundreds of millions of voters. Trump needs to address it, right? But I think the Democrats have done a really good job of making that topic like a topic that people
toxic.
Toxic. You just don't want to touch. There's an organization out there, guys. It's called New York Citizens Audit. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they over the course of the last 2.5 years, they have really been digging into the New York State voter rolls, and they have found so many discrepancies at the core level of. And again, I don't understand it enough to really explain it. There's a wonderful woman. Molly Hornick, I believe is her name. She's the associate director of the organization. But they found in New York alone, there were over like 100 million, I think, duplicate voter ID numbers. So if you're a New Yorker, you may have your voter ID number, which is supposed to be unique to you. It's like a fingerprint. They were finding duplicates. So like you would have two, and in the election, your second one voted for a Democrat. So election security needs to continue to be addressed, even though it's become a toxic topic. Our state legislatures had the chance to fix it. Republican legislatures had the chance to fix it, but they were so afraid to bring it up because they didn't want to become conspiracy theorists.
Where are you again?
I'm currently in Virginia. I'm originally from New York.
Okay.
I had Miss Hornick on my show in the past. She is super smart, and she's passionate about this topic. So if you guys ever have the chance, you should have her on.
Cool. Yeah, I do think it's an important thing. I'm not a Trump supporter, so I don't know if I necessarily buy into 100% of the rhetoric around the whole election without getting too much into it. But at the same time, if you're going to sell me on this is a thing that needs to be fixed, and it's like the most important thing ever at the time, again, going kind of back to midterms, but then get amnesia later on, it almost was to me like, well, then like, what's the point of any of this shit you're doing? If you're not, at least present to me a plan here that, how can we fix this ahead of time? Because if we don't fix this ahead of time, I don't see how necessarily you are going, for DeSantis, you say you're going to be able to win. Well, how? Yeah.
Right. And thank God for federalism, right? So if there was a federal solution to it, which the Democrats are trying to reach that one, the hell's the act they keep trying to pass, but it keeps failing, where it was basically the federal government would run all elections.
I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the name, but right, they're trying to federalize the entire system.
It was named after a dead senator or congressman, but whatever. I'll find the name of it and we can correct it in the show notes, I'm sure. But it's up to the state legislatures to fix this. So I guess if I were a political strategist on Trump's team or on DeSantis's team, I would start talking with the different state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans and saying, hey, listen, you guys own all three chambers. You guys have the governor and you guys have both of the lower chambers. You guys need to start fixing these elections and really start pushing through some election reform, so then judges can't legislate from the bench again. And so the Zuckerbergs of the world can't dump hundreds of millions of dollars into Wisconsin to ensure that mail-in drop-in ballots are strategically placed throughout the entire state.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. I appreciate at least you have an idea or a plan you're putting forward on it. So I think kind of the theme of our episode here as we get into the next couple of things is going to be like, we're going to hold them accountable if they're not going to hold themselves accountable to some extent. Follow-up question on DeSantis here, saying he can win and he could be a 2-term president. I mean, I doubt it because I don't think he could even beat Trump. So it's a moot point. But let's say somehow he does actually end up beating Trump and becoming the Republican nominee. Do you think that MAGA supporters are going to swallow their pride to some extent and actually vote for him in the general election against Joe Biden?
That is a fantastic that's such a fantastic question, because I'm a stern believer that regardless of who wins the primary election, the people have spoken, right? And it's our job as voters, right? Let's just hypothetically say that DeSantis wins the nomination. I'm going to throw my entire support behind him, because party unity is more important than losing our country. And guys, if you don't think I'm not a guy of doom and gloom, right? I don't like bringing negativity to anything, but if you don't believe another Biden term is going to tank our country, you're living under a rock. We cannot afford to have these radical leftist, Marxist, communists at the highest seats of power within our country.
I appreciate your take, definitely. I just don't know myself how likely it is. I don't see it, at least right now. for the MAGA crowd. I even remember the man himself back in 2016. I think one of the best moments on those debate stages, where he was asked, like, would you support the Republican candidate no matter what? And he basically said no. Like, why should I commit to that myself? And I actually thought that was pretty wise at the time, because a lot of them are like shitty neocon types. And as a libertarian, one of my biggest criticisms of Rand Paul at the time, who was just such a disappointment, was he criticized Trump about not supporting the eventual nominee. And I'm like, hey, dude, you're supposed to be the libertarian. Like, why would you support, I don't know, Jeb Bush or whatever, and to some extent, if he got there. So I don't know, man. I don't see it. Like, I just, with how much vitriol there's been, and I mean, I'm seeing people like make public statements that, they'll just sit out the election. I don't know. I hope not. I hope maybe they'll come over to the Libertarian Party. Who knows?
Well, listen, it's going to come down to, I'm predicting it now. So what is it? June 1st. I'm predicting it now. The last two men standing are going to be DeSantis, and it's going to be Trump. And whoever wins the party nomination, it's important. It's imperative that the loser throws their entire support behind that candidate, because things are bad in our country. Things are terrible. I don't have to say that. Your listeners know how bad things are, and things are only going to continue to get worse unless we have real leadership in Washington, D.C. And that goes throughout all three branches, and even both of the lower chambers, right? Our founding fathers left us three warnings, right? They told us three things. They said, listen, and I'm paraphrasing here because they were much more eloquent than Benji. They said that we the people, we need to be three things. We need to be well informed, we need to be involved, and we need to be moral. And for far too long, we the people have sat out and left it up to our politicians to do the right thing. And that's why we're in this mess. Both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, independents, they're all in cahoots, and it's time for the American people to get back involved and be well informed.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Definitely. One of my biggest criticism of libertarians is they've sat out for too long in the culture war or whatever's going on. And for a time they had too much of like a live and let live attitude.
Right.
Yeah, that's like what got us to this point. I'm glad that, a lot of them have woken up, and there's new leadership now that's not taking that approach anymore. There's, libertarianism is a political ideology. It's not a cultural ideology. It's not supposed to be about live and let live. It's supposed to be about small government and natural rights and property rights and all these things. It doesn't have anything to say about transgender, whatever, and this and that and whatever. Like, you're allowed to still have your own personal cultural opinions if you're a libertarian. The idea is like, let's shrink the size of the state so that it can't be used as a weapon against me or against some other person. But I could still be a Christian and like advocate for Christian values and live by them and whatnot. So I agree with you there 100%, man, definitely. So let's get into what I think is, again, like I was saying before, we're going to kind of try and hold them accountable ourselves. At least for me, I don't know about for you, my biggest issue in this election and the biggest topic is the war in Ukraine. I think just because the policy of playing like footsie with Vladimir Putin and like nuclear brinksmanship is fucking insane.
Right.
He's a former KGB agent. He's not exactly a good guy, as some people might also think he is. And if we end up in some sort of nuclear war, like, we can't fix all the other fucking problems because we're all vaporized and we're all dead. So the way I'm looking at it so far is, if you're good on this issue, like, that's probably who I'm going to vote for, right? Because it trumps all the others. And so far, Trump has been like the best on the issue. So I want to kind of hold DeSantis here accountable with you. One of the things I've been trying to do is basically just ask, like, what's this fucking guy's opinion or position on Ukraine? Because it doesn't seem consistent. And now, if you remember going back to, let's see, this is March. I remember Tucker had kind of asked all of the candidates to give them like their written position on the war in Ukraine, which Trump had a really good one, and DeSantis had a good one at the time. which I brought back up here from Fox News, says DeSantis's remarks, which came amid increasing speculation that will enter 2024 race. He says, he said, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them, DeSantis told Tucker. Noting that peace should be the objective in the war, the popular Sunshine State governor insisted the U.S. should not provide assistance that would require deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage it in offensive operations beyond its borders, adding that providing F-16s and long-range missiles would be off the table. Worth noting here, like they are now providing F-16s. This is now, we're now in June, it's 3 months later. I remember even Biden at the time was like, no, we're not giving them F-16s or anything like that. Now they are giving them
right.
F-16s. DeSantis also noted that American citizens are also entitled to know how the billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars are being utilized in Ukraine, and knocked regime change policy as being popular among the D.C. foreign policy interventionists, suggesting Russian leader Vladimir Putin's successor would likely be even more ruthless, which I tend to agree with. James and I from We the People Radio, when he was sitting here across from me, we actually were like, hey, like as bad as Vladimir Putin is, he's been pretty restrained over the past 20 years or so. And
Right.
I'm not saying he's a good guy, and I'm not saying he doesn't have aspirations, but he has been restrained to some extent until this very moment in time. Like it took, like a proxy war of choice being fought on his own border, in a sense, for him to actually get involved. So this was actually what I thought was a pretty good take by DeSantis. And then he apparently walked this back somewhat the very next day, which makes me skeptical of him. I don't know about you. What are your thoughts on that before I get to like his most recent take on it?
Yeah, we can address how he walks it back when we get there. But I happen to agree with this statement too, right? I am not a proponent of this war. I don't believe American treasure, which is probably I think it's just over $112 billion, should be sunk into Eastern Europe. Americans are war fatigued, right? We had 20 plus endless years of war in the Middle East. As a veteran myself, I am absolutely, try not to swear here, tired of war. I'm tired of war, and so are our American war heroes. So the idea that we're sinking $112+ billion into Eastern Europe to fight a proxy war is just prolonging what's to come. I have two friends that I have on the podcast quite frequently. It's Colonel Peterman and Colonel Davis, both strategic war planners during the Afghanistan and the Iraqi war. And as you can imagine, the three of us have differing opinions when it comes to the war. In fact, we had about an hour and a half conversation where I was defending my position on why I don't think we should be in Eastern Europe. So no, I don't think we should be sinking our treasure, especially when our treasure far outweighs the amount that the rest of the world is giving. I want to say the next closest organization, and I call that because it's like the 7 organizations within the European Union. They provide like 7% or maybe even less than that of the aid that's going into Ukraine.
We've been subsidizing their defense for forever, in a sense, and just like from a an ideological point of view, and being Italian and understanding Europe, these people have been fighting each other for fucking forever, literally.
Right.
They've been fighting each other forever. They're going to continue fighting each other forever. They're fighting each other right now. Why should we? This is kind of like the founding principle of our country. Like, hey, we're not going to get entangled in Europe's beef anymore, because then we'll always be entangled in some war. And we're just so far from that now. It's wild.
And that's what I love about the party, right? The Republican Party is for so many years, and I'll be the first one to admit it. I was a supporter of the Iraq War. In fact, that's the whole September 11th, 2001. That's the whole reason I joined the military, was because I was ready to get to the Middle East and fight on behalf of my country, right? After 20 years of war, I've changed my mind. We never should have been in Iraq. We never should have been in Afghanistan. Too many young men and women have died because of the special interests here in America. And I foresee that's exactly what's going to happen in Eastern Europe. The Biden administration will tell you right now that there are no boots on the ground, and we know that's a farce, right?
Yeah.
Especially after the leak
Yeah.
came out,
Right.
right? And I was saying it even before the leak came out. I'm like, we have boots on the ground, right? We have boots on the ground. Anytime they tell you we don't have something, we have it, folks.
Even beyond that, man, I mean, the leak's also shown that like the Pentagon is basically the brain of the entire war in Ukraine. Like they're giving
Right.
the Ukrainians the intel. They're like showing the guys like, hey, this is like where you should move the troops. This is when you should attack. It becomes also like, all right, when does Putin decide like I'm just directly at war with the United States? They're, they might not have their guys pointing guns at me themselves, but they're telling them where, they're telling Ukrainians where to point their guns. It's, to an extent.
Right. I'm here to tell you that if it weren't for the American citizens, the American taxpayers, and the $112 billion that we provided in both military, humanitarian aid, Ukraine would be a parking lot right now. It's because of the massive amounts of money that was stolen from us that they're still in this fight. And Ukrainians, I want you to know that. So you better be thankful to the American taxpayer that our president and this administration has stolen money from us to give to you.
Yeah. And I think even, that's why I think Trump has the right opinion on this. I think with that comes the leverage to end the war. Where,
right.
We interviewed Mike Termott, who's one of the libertarian candidates for president. And we asked him kind of like, what would you do if you were the president? Like, how do you end this thing? And he's like, I'm just going to make a whole bunch of phone calls. And essentially tell the Ukrainians like, hey, like we're not funding this thing anymore. So you got like 6 weeks. You better like decide what you're going to do if you're going to come to the table and negotiate, because in 6 weeks we're not funding you, and you know what's going to probably happen at that point in time. And then I'm going to also make the same phone call to Vladimir Putin and be like, hey, buddy, I don't want to fund this war anymore. But I can. So if you want it to be over, like you're going to want me to stop funding this war, right? Like, how do you get me to want to stop funding this war? Leave. Let's sign a deal, negotiate, peace, etc. Like you just tell both sides the exact same thing, because at the end of the day, who's really like funding this war? It's America. It's a proxy war, right? And we hold all the leverage over the whole situation.
But do you think President Putin leaves? I don't think he does. Like, how does he save face with his country if he just picks up his troops and they go back to Russia?
Remains to be seen in the details of the negotiation, right? Like, what does it actually look like?
Right.
There's going to have to be some concessions made. That's how he saves face. Look what, we get to keep Crimea, and Ukraine has signed an agreement to not ever join NATO and be neutral or something like that. And he could turn around and be like, see, like, at least I protected our border.
Right.
You know what I'm trying to say? At least to his own, critics up higher up there, who he's probably somewhat accountable to. So, I think that's the biggest issue. Again, DeSantis now launches his campaign last week. Was it last week? Right.
Yeah.
On a Twitter space. And curiously enough, I mean, not really curiously enough, because I kind of know that it was all pre-planned, right? Like who was going to get to ask questions and stuff. And I get it. The most important topic was not brought up at all. The war in Ukraine was not brought up to DeSantis whatsoever in the Twitter space. After the Twitter space is over, he goes on Fox News briefly, where, to their credit, and I think they're shitty most of the time, but to Fox News was Trey, what's his name?
Trey Gowdy.
He actually asked DeSantis on his position on the war again, and he'll listen to it, and here's what he had to say.
Well, first, I think what we need to do as a veteran is recognize that our military has become politicized. You talk about gender ideology, you talk about things like global warming that they're somehow concerned in. That's not the military that I served in. We need to return our military to focusing on commitment, focusing on the core values and the core mission. That would be something that I could take care of on day one. There'll be a new sheriff in town as commander-in-chief. And I think you'll see recruiting start to get back to where it needs to be, because people don't want to join a woke military. And I think it's been really, really problematic. Look, in terms of what's going on over in Eastern Europe, I'd like to see a settlement of this. I do not want to see a wider war. I think it's completely unknowable what it will look like in January of 2025. But I would not want to see the United States with our troops get enmeshed in a war in Russia or in Ukraine.
Our military's woke. That's what I think about the war in Ukraine. I mean, yeah, obviously, right? No one likes the idea of the military being woke.
Right.
Again, the outside looking in, his opinion seems to be almost exactly the same as Joe Biden's opinion. Like, yeah, Joe Biden wants the war to be over too. He just wants to win it and crush the Russians so we could expand our empire, as I like to call it, over there. At least he said that there's not going to be boots. He doesn't want American boots on the ground. But again, like Joe Biden has also said the exact same thing. I don't know, man. What do you think? It's just laughable to me.
So when I read between the lines here, this is what I see. This is what I hear. He's trying to appeal to two groups, right? He's trying to appeal to the middle class and the poor, right? Because we are primarily the ones who make up our all volunteer force, right? He knows that the middle class and the poor rely on the military for financial stability. He also knows that those class of people generally don't subscribe to the ivory tower elite wokeism that gets perpetuated by the New York Times and by some of the most esteemed education institutions within our country, right? We don't buy into that shit. So he's appealing to them. And then you hear him at the end of the conversation saying something along the lines of, but like I'd like to see some sort of settlement or some sort of solution to this. I don't know what it's going to look like in January, blah, 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 blah. So now I think what he's doing is he's appealing to the Warhawks and he's appealing to the special interests and he's appealing to Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, right? The munitions, the defense manufacturers, right? Saying, but who knows how long this thing's going to last? So keep your campaign contributions coming in.
Yeah, this just makes me so damn suspicious of him, right?
100%.
I'm not saying there's no value in opposing the woke stuff. I think those are some of the best things about Ron DeSantis is he's opposed the woke shit. I'm not one of those libertarians again who's like, going to take no position on this stuff. But at the same time, I'm like aware that the deep state or whatever you want to call them, they don't really give a fuck about the woke stuff either. It's just like a means to an end, in my opinion. So how easy would it be for them to turn that right around and co-opt the whole anti-woke movement to be like, yeah, well, we're going to make sure that the military is anti-woke. Therefore, we could go fight a war, of conquest across the word or something, and try and play again on that, like we're talking about, like that 2003 Iraq, like hoorah, America type thing. Like they'll just do whatever suits their needs. They're not really. In my opinion, I mean, maybe there are some true believers in there, like religious people with this stuff, but the worst people, I think, are just using it as a means to an end. So it kind of makes me concerned on that regard, that he could be like co-opted to some extent.
And I think he may be. What I love about President Trump is the fact that he really didn't need anybody's money. Of course he needs campaign contributions, right? But he can't be bought and paid for like some of these other people, like Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis does not have a massive war chest to campaign with, so he relies on these special interests. Trump, on the other hand, has never been beholden to the deep state, right? And I'll define the deep state so everybody knows where I'm coming from. The deep state to me is not this shadowy figure that lurks around the corner. It's the bureaucrats who have embedded themselves within our government for over 20 years, for decades, who believe that they wield this constitutional power that they don't actually wield. They have zero power, and yet they believe that it's their way or the highway, to put it in layman's terms. And I think that's why we saw even the GOP fight Trump so hard the first 2 years he was in office, like Paul Ryan, who currently sits on the board at Fox News, who is a never Trumper, who won't give him the time of day. So yes, to answer your question in a long way, I think DeSantis can be easily manipulated, and I don't think it's good for our country.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of my biggest fears, if he were to be elected, is that he's going to take the approach of like, all right, let's shake hands, let's work things out. We'll like reform a lot of these institutions, like reform them. And one of the things I like about Trump is like, again, I'm not 100% sold either, but I feel like at this point, again, me being an anarchist and I kind of want the whole system destroyed, I feel like Trump is way more aligned with me because he's going to go in there with a wrecking ball. And as people have said, execute order F. Everyone's fucking fired. Where I want to see that happen. I'm not sold yet 100%. It's actually going to happen. But I feel like it's more likely with Trump, whereas DeSantis is more going to look to like work with these people, kind of like in a way that Trump did the first, like the first year or so. Like, all right, like I'll work with you guys and let's just, like I'm trying to, like, I think maybe he was a little bit naive in the beginning, Trump, that these people really did have like Americans' best interests at heart, and then you just needed some like real guidance from the right leader. Right. They don't, of course, obviously. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I hope Trump does, follow through on that execute order F.
I think he will. I think unfortunately his presidency was turned upside down based on the COVID lie. Sure. But I think knowing what he knows now and knowing how deep the swamp actually runs, I think he is willing to smash it into a million pieces. What's funny is Chuck Schumer actually forewarned us all about this. It was in 2016 or maybe 2015. Then candidate Trump was stumping for his campaign, and he was talking about the deep state, and he was talking about the intelligence community, and just basically saying how these institutions are corrupt to the core, and they're entirely too powerful, and they're stripping freedom and liberty away from the people, because he was a big we the people type of person. And Chuck Schumer is on the news, and he says to whoever the host was or hostess, I forget who it was, he says that the intelligence community will screw you 6 ways to Sunday if you attack them.
I remember that clearly. It was like a mask slips moment for Chuck.
And did we not see it?
Yeah.
The Russian dossier, right? The Mueller report,
right? How about the report that just came out? Why am I skipping on the name? Right, just proving that it was all started on falsehoods and should never have been.
The Durham report.
Right? Yeah, we were just talking about this again yesterday. We're recording. Yeah, like right. What Chuck Schumer was saying was true, and you were seeing it in real time happen. It's one of the things that makes me like Trump. Is that look, if they're trying to destroy the guy so hard, there must be a reason why. He's not necessarily perhaps doing it for the reasons I would like him to do it. I was telling this to some of my buddies the other day. Like, I want the system completely destroyed. I don't really give a fuck how or why that happens, right? If Trump is going to do it because his own ego is so offended by what's happened to him and he still accomplishes my goals anyway, great. I don't care. I just want it to happen. So I hope it does happen. And with the spirit of, trying to kind of hold everybody accountable here ourselves. And you were talking about like, the swamp before. One, spot where I'm not going to let Trump get away with is Lindsey Graham. Correct me if I'm wrong at any moment. I know Lindsey Graham campaigned with Trump recently this year, I think in South Carolina when he was there. I know they haven't had the greatest relationship over the years, but he seems to be someone that Trump is working with, which again, that turns me back around to be a little bit cautious of like, has he not learned his lesson yet that he's going to, work with a guy like Lindsey Graham? I have this tweet here from Clandestine where he says, for those wondering why Lindsey Graham is so invested in the war in Ukraine winning and Russians dying, Lindsey was with Deep State John McCain in Ukraine in 2016, telling the Ukrainians how they are going to get support from Washington so that they can go on the offensive against Russia in 2017. That's just interesting. Remember, a lot of people think like the history of the war in Ukraine started in 2022. It did not. Only problem was Trump won and the deep state was suspended until Trump was removed. The reason Lindsey called for Putin to be assassinated and celebrates Russians dying is because if Russia wins, Lindsey's corruption in Ukraine will be exposed, and then he's a dead man. I mean, it's a little bit, it's being a little bit dramatic there, but I just, I'm going to be critical of it because like I don't see how Lindsey Graham is redeemable in any way whatsoever. You can't work this with this guy. I thought his comments the other day, I think his comments about like the Russians dying were kind of clipped and a little bit taken out of context. I don't think he outright said like Russians dying are good or whatever it is they said, but he did say that Vladimir Putin should be assassinated. And now just from a policy point of view, I mean, how do you can't like get back from that. Like you give the man no off ramp. You try, like, you convince him that his life is in danger that could possibly lead to him going and holding out all the stops to make sure that he survives or his regime survives, right? So again, my question to you is going to be, what's the deal with Lindsey Graham and Trump? And should I be worried that Trump is going to get misled again by assholes like this?
I would hope that he's learned his lesson by now, right? I would hope that he does a better job of choosing his staff better. Not that he made every staff decision,
Sure.
but I think coming into it this time, I think he's going to have a much better idea and who he can trust and who he can't trust. You're right. Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump often agreed on a lot of things. In fact, one thing they disagreed on was foreign policy, specifically Russia. Graham, as you just noted, he took more of a critical stance toward Russia, while Trump occasionally expressed like a more agreeable views with Russia. The term that comes to mind to me is statesmanship. It's important that while we have our differences, even within the party, it's important that we're not us, they, our politicians, are statesmen. In order to actually have real effective change within our country, you have to be willing to cross the aisle at some point, right? You have to be willing to negotiate bills or negotiate policy decisions that benefit the country as a whole. And I think that's just where I'm going to leave it, because I think I think that Trump's relationship with Lindsey Graham is forged from statesmanship. And I could be wrong. I don't really know much about their personal relationship. I don't know if he's ever had dinner with the man.
Fair enough. I get your point.
I think that if Trump wins his presidency, I think he'll be more skeptical of some of these swamp rhino creatures.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking to achieve here. And to just add on to your point, like if you're going to negotiate an end to the war, you're going to have to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, like we were saying before. Like, it doesn't mean that we got to like him or whatever, but there's power players, and you got to do what you got to do. I just do hope that that, again, my point I'm trying to make here is I hope it's not a sign of like the same thing again. I hope it's not a sign of like John Bolton and not Colonel Douglas McGregor again. Like, I hope Colonel Douglas McGregor is like the first person in the fucking door in the Trump administration. And this time when he draws up the order to like withdraw the troops from Syria or whatever it is, Trump actually follows through on them. I hope so. I hope that's the outcome. And he picks those right people. He has at times, but he's also picked the wrong people. So it's kind of what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, and then you had a lot of officers who were just outright disobeying his orders, right?
Yeah,
General Milley, for example, just not doing what the president told him to do. Milley should have been fired a long time.
Yeah, I found that whole thing so hysterical. The Milley, that he would not take an immoral order or whatever from Trump. And I'm like, God, like, I hope so. Like, I hope the person in charge, to be honest with you, if the president gave some sort of insane order to launch the nukes for no reason whatsoever, that there's going to be someone with a brain in their fucking head that's going to be like, you know what? No. The thing is, like, that wasn't the actual case. There was no point in time where that was ever going to happen with Trump. He's not, and if you're in that seat, if you're in that position, you're not an idiot, General Milley. You got to know that obviously Trump is not this crazy psychopath that everybody's made him out to be. What he was doing is just playing politics.
Right.
Right. And just was just wild. Yeah. I don't like that guy at all. So Ben, my final question to you, I'm going to kind of go outside here of the Republican Party. My final question to you is going to be like, what do you think about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And his, challenge to Joe Biden here? I personally think he's interesting. And I think at times he's almost sounded indistinguishable from us, right? Or from conservatives or libertarians. Right. What do you think about that? What do you think about him in general and his campaign?
I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. scares the Biden administration, right? He is super likable. I like him. In fact, I went and listened to him speak at the Defeat the Mandates rally down here in Washington, D.C. And it was a moving experience. I absolutely love how the man speaks out against government tyranny, especially when it comes to forced vaccinations. I don't know if you know this, but he was actually injured by a vaccination. And I think that's why he's got that speech impediment. And I think that's like why he's so passionate about it. I like Robert F. Kennedy, and he could, if it weren't for some of the social and moral issues, I think he probably could fall in line with the Republicans.
Yeah, he's like your old school conservative Democrat to
Right.
some extent.
But even JFK wouldn't be a member of
Right.
of today's Democrat Party. I think we all
That's
know
how much
that.
the Overton window has shifted, all these
Right.
years later. Yeah, I do think it's valuable. I hope they actually facilitate a campaign competition on that side, because boy, he's going to land some blows against Biden. Like, I don't know if he's going to actually win. I just think because the base is probably so corrupted or just rotten at this point, like the actual voter base themselves. And then don't forget, like, the DNC is just so goddamn corrupt. I don't see how they'll ever just like their inner workings of their party. I think they still have the super delegate system to some extent. Like, they're not going to let fucking Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Be the nominee at all. So, but I do think he's valuable. He brings something to the table, definitely. We
all remember what happened to Bernie and how the DNC stabbed him in the back.
Yeah, I was a Bernie bro back in the day, man, at the time back then. And that's a funny point, someone for me, like, all the talk about elections and whatnot. Like, yeah, they the whole thing was they put the finger on the scale. Let's just put it that way against him. So how likely is it that they don't try to do that again somewhere else? You know what I mean? Read between the lines there. So yeah, interesting, man. Ben, I really want to thank you again for coming on with me, man, and kind of discussing this. It's nice to see that some people can actually have a productive conversation around DeSantis. And,
absolutely.
One last thing I was going to ask you. I know your show is Pilsners and Politics. Chris and I, we do reviews sometimes of beers and things. So I was going to ask you, have you heard about the right-wing beer? It's what's called ultra right beer. I don't know if you've seen of that, right? Seen it?
I haven't.
So there's a beer coming out. It's basically like a counter to Bud Light. It's called Ultra Right Beer. If you want to go check it out at some point, it's called ultrarightbeer.com. I ordered a pack. It's so overwhelmingly back ordered right now that I haven't gotten it yet. But when I do, I'm going to give one to Chris, and we're going to review it. I was going to ask if you want to review that with us, if you want to buy a case. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, we'll do it together. Just as like, see how it is, see if it's good. It's also funny. Leads into the whole Bud Light thing. So
yeah, I'd absolutely love to.
All right, I'll hold you to it then.
All right, good.
All right, we'll wrap it up. Why don't you plug your show one more time, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, man. Pilsners and Politics. You guys can find it on anywhere you listen to your podcast. We're spread across 38 different platforms. Again, we love freedom and liberty, and the purpose of the show is to both be educating as well as entertaining. And if we can help at least one person who is sitting on that fence, getting ready to go to the other side to challenge government tyranny, then we have succeeded, because we want to help you find your courage and stand up and speak out.
Agree with you 100%, man. There's value in red pilling each and every person, even if it's just one.
That's it.
All right, man. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Adios.